You know it, we know it. Hours away from big mayoral elections in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, but this is going to be the last time we can say that for the foreseeable future. Welcome to Breaking the News. I'm Janice Shortle. So after tomorrow, St. Paul is going to switch things up, and they're going to hold city elections on even years. And that move is supposed to make things simpler for voters there. But as Kent is about to talk about, that's just part of the reason they made this change.
Yeah, Jana, you don't have to be an election expert to know that a lot more people vote in presidential election years. When this takes effect in 2028, you could realistically see St. Paul turnout nearly triple over the last mayoral election in 2021, which saw about 53,000 people vote. And keep in mind, that was good turnout for a city election.
10 years ago, a city election in St. Paul garnered fewer than 30,000 votes, representing less than 15% of registered voters.
I always known turnout was low, but it was just, this is like ridiculous.
In response, Peter Butler launched Odd to Even, a ballot initiative to bring St. Paul elections in line with federal ones. And after gathering the signatures required last year, 61% of voters approved it without spending any money on advertising it.
It just makes so much more sense, and the average voter doesn't think like the local politician. The local politician's worried about having to compete for attention, for money, for volunteers, but most voters would say this just makes sense to vote for everybody at the same time.
Plus, it cuts down on how much advertising and
Exactly.
everything else you have to put up with.
That was kind of my selling point, is don't you want a year off from all the ads and the door knocking?
But it's not the only reason why. He's among a growing number of people looking to do away with the odd tradition.
It creates really sizable disparities in local politics, much bigger than ones that we see in national elections.
Boston University professor Catherine Levine Einstein found that disparity during an analysis of election data nationwide.
In every city that we studied, older homeowners dominate local elections, and that disparity gets worse in off-cycle elections. So that's just a pattern that persists everywhere.
If you look at which parts of the city of St. Paul turn out, it's the western side, so it's the more likely to be white, higher income relatively to the other areas of the city.
Butler says the same can be said about Minneapolis, where he works. Wealthier voters in the southwest part of the city consistently vote in higher numbers and garner more attention because of it. And while early voting is near a record high for a mayoral election this year, history shows turnout won't come close to a presidential or even a midterm year.
We were just here a year ago voting for other races. Why not just combine them?
Now, Minneapolis has also looked into shifting its elections as well, but there is still a very basic question to answer first that also applies to St. Paul, and it's this: the actual size of the ballot involved. Both cities have ranked choice voting, which demands more space on this paper, but right now, state law requires that ballots be limited to one double-sided page in order to work with ballot scanners. And Jana, we're talking about, just for mayor, 15 candidates and then 3 columns for ranked choice. That's a big piece of real estate when you've got president, Senate, all kinds of other things.
I mean, it seems like such a silly thing, but it is a practical thing that kind of stands in the way. So somebody's going to have to get crafty, and they're not going to be able to make the print any smaller than it already is on there. I found that very interesting about like what's best for the voter versus what's best for the politician, right?
Well, that was part of the pushback when this first came to be, is that it was going to be harder to compete and break through in those big national election years. We know that advertising gets bought up, everyone's minds gets occupied with these big races, having more of that breakthrough. But at the same time, he said, that way you have to break through yourself as a candidate and appeal to everyone instead of getting more mobilization to knock on doors.
Yeah, a lot of interesting bits of discussion with that. Thanks so much, Kent.